So before we start cutting our piece of wood here, we need to make sure we clamp it to the table nice and firmly. For today, I'm only going to cut partway through the wood, just to practice my cutting. But if I ever want to cut all the way through the wood, I need to clamp it to the table differently than what I'm going to demonstrate now. So if I want to cut all the way through the piece of wood, if I put it in the vise here, obviously my limitation or problem will be that part of the piece of wood is inside there, so I can't cut all the way through. I'm going to hit the table, and it's alright, I would just have to rotate it around. However, if I didn't want to have to rotate it around and save myself a bit of time, I can actually take this piece of wood here and I can clamp it to the table, where I then have my line uninterrupted and I can cut all the way through. To do that, you need to use then yourself a clamp, something like this. How this clamp works is this little trigger on the bottom here, which is often in the same position on most clamps, allows me to unlock it. So I push that and I can slide it up and down freely. And when I've got it in position, then I use this here, which is a trigger, to kind of I squeeze the trigger, and it of course gets tighter and holds my piece of wood in position. So I take this piece here and I slide my piece of wood into position, and I slide the clamp using that little trigger down here, you can see down below, and I slide that up, and then I use the trigger here to just tighten it on, and squeezing nice and tight. I shouldn't be able to squeeze it any tighter, and that wood should be nice and firm. When it's in position, then I can then freely cut. For this demonstration, I'll release that same way, and I'm going to put this actually into the vise. So I'm going to place this piece of wood here, and I'll rotate this. And it's very important that both the vise or the clamp are holding that piece of wood from moving very little. The less it moves, the easier it is for you to cut. My first demonstration is going to be with the Western style panel saw here, and I'm going to start by cutting on my top edge here. Now, to make sure that I can cut on that line perfectly, I have a little trick, which is using my thumb to guide me. Now, that sounds probably really dangerous, but it's not, because the curvature of my thumb here actually allows me, if I place it flat here, to run that blade along here on the soft or the flat side of the blade and not touch the sharp part of the blade. So I can actually put my thumb there and cut, and it won't actually touch my thumb. The problem that I often see will be that people tend to roll their thumb forward or backwards, and this actually makes that curvature come closer to the blade, which will cause maybe a little bit of friction and a bit of touching of the blade on the thumb. It's not like you're going to cut your thumb off doing this, but it might just not be pleasant. So it's always important just to try to make sure you keep your thumb flat when you're doing this. Now, when I put my saw onto the line here, I can make micro adjustments with my thumb. I can push it across a little bit and get it in position. And I want to place my saw blade on the waist side of the line. And I know the line is thin, but there is one or a left or right of the line. And if you're going to discard a piece of wood, you want to be able to see the line at the end. The best type of cut is if you can just see the line on the edge, and you want to be able to see that on your good side, on your part that you're keeping. So I place that there. I place my thumb in position here, and then I'm going to decide whether I cut on the back edge here or the front edge here. So I can either cut starting like this here, where I'm going to cut on the corner there, or I cut on the front here. If I cut flat across the top, there's a very good chance that that's going to scoot across, it's going to move all over the place. So I find it's much more successful to start on one edge. And I actually prefer, myself personally, on the back edge here. It allows me a little bit more vision to see what I'm doing. So I place my thumb in that position, get it in position here, and I'm going to tilt it forward in my case. And I'm doing a push motion because the Western style saw is cut on a push motion. So remembering to do that, we start with a push. And I'm not going to go too far before I then pull back again. Now at this point, I want to make sure that I'm already on the line. And if I blow away the dust, I can see that I'm already nice on that line. But I'm going to keep my thumb here, because at this point the saw can still move a little bit. So I'm going to keep the thumb there just to guide it. So I'm focusing on that push motion. And it's really good to note that if your finding it difficult or it's not working so nicely, you need to relax. Don't push so hard. It's often when you push harder and you think it's going to go faster that it actually goes slower because the blade keeps on getting stuck and caught. So relax, slow it down a little bit, and just focus on keeping that on the line. Now, the point at which I don't need my thumb anymore, where I'm going to take away my thumb, is when I've reached my other edge. So if I started on the back edge here, and when I've reached the front edge here, I can then take away my thumb, because at this point now it's in a solid channel, and it can't really go much left or right. It can't scoot across the piece of wood anymore. So now that I've got my saw started, and it's gone all the way down the top of the piece of wood here, I'm going to now focus on trying to cut it down the wood plumb. That means it's going straight down the wood, not on an angle. I don't need my thumb anymore, so at this point I can use my left hand to maybe support the piece of wood while I cut it. If it moves at all, it makes it a little difficult to cut, or I can just let it relax and hang out. And at this point, what I'm really focusing on is not pushing too hard, but keeping that saw perfectly straight, keeping my hand straight, keeping my arm straight, everything in line. As soon as I start twisting my body and changing positions, I start to twist the blade here, and all that's going to cause is to be very difficult to cut, as well as maybe some high screeching noises from the friction here of the blade. So nice and light on the hand, I'm just cutting and following that line down. Now as I cut, I can make micro adjustments, which means I can slightly twist the blade if it starts to wander off the line. So if it's wandering slightly off the line, inwards or outwards, I can slightly twist the blade, very, very slightly, to get it in line again. However, if I don't get onto this straight away, if it starts to wander too far off and I just keep on going and ignore that, I can't correct that. So I can only correct it if it's a very small amount off. Otherwise, I'm going to have to just restart again, and this can be quite costly, of course, if it's your nice piece of wood, not a scrap piece of wood like this. So, focusing on that line. Little piece came away there. Now, if you find you're getting yourself stuck at all, it will be because you're pushing too hard and you're twisting your wrist. So making sure that anytime it gets stuck, or if it makes a really high-pitched noise, it means you need to relax, loosen the grip a little bit, make sure you've got that blade nice and straight, and then start again. Alright, and perfectly, you would hopefully end up with a nice straight line here. Now with the Japanese style saw, very much the same process. This case, we actually have a guide on here which helps to hold the blade straight, but that also limits how deep you can cut. So you're going to see that I will only be able to cut partway down the line. The good thing about this saw is that it's very easy to cut with, and it works on a pull motion, which is a little easier to start. So when I place my position on here with my thumb and get it nice and aligned, I can pull back at this time and then cut. And that actually I find much easier to get started. If you're a first time beginner with this or any saws, you'll find these saws much easier. So place that back in there, and then again keeping everything straight. Once I've got that back edge, I don't need my thumb anymore, and then I'm literally letting the weight of the saw do the work, the weight of my hand a little bit as well. I'm not pushing down. I'm not really putting or exerting much force. So you really shouldn't be getting exhausted doing this. It should be a nice light motion. And then you can see now I've reached my limits, and if I've cut my line nicely, you can see that I've cut just to the side of the line. You can actually see very closely that there's just a small hint of my line still on there.